And there was one verse actually in the Bible that
Mm.
really stood out to me. And there's two things I don't think they're focused on enough, even today. One of them was, um, do not just be hearers of the word, be doers of the word. Right? I took that
Mm.
personally, you know. I took that really personally. Like, actually, I'm not supposed to be someone who just talks about it or goes every Sunday and hears a sermon and then doesn't go out and share that. And then, one of the last things Christ said, prior to crucifixion is, go out into the world and spread the gospel, you know. And I just wasn't seeing that from church to church. I was seeing a lot of people coming like a community club, and we all have a great time and we get our fix while we're in the building. But then Monday morning happens and we all just go back into the real world. But how many people are actually sharing what they've learned? And I'm not talking about preaching. I'm talking about, are you being a doer of the word? Are you living what you've just been worshiping?
And welcome back to another episode of the Made to Shine show. As you just heard in that introduction, I am so selfishly excited right now because this is someone that I have been admiring from afar for, good night, Steve. I guess it's been a while, since 2023, and we finally, God's timing, made it happen. But again, as we were speaking, I'm so grateful it didn't happen until now because I've gotten to see your work and more of what you do and how you do it and the heart and the spirit behind it. And as everybody knows on this podcast, we believe every single person has a ministry, not just preachers, not just pastors. It's the way you shine your light in all spaces that God has trusted you with, in your corporate job, in school, with your friends, with your family. And Steve, man, oh man, what do you not do? I mean, you are a podcast host, you're a 16 times author, you're a poet, you're executive producer, you're a dad. You do so much. And I think, and I told you this before we hopped on, but what struck me about why I was like, I need this guy on is because of the light you shine in all that you do. And it just speaks so truly to your spirit, to your creator, who you're connected with, and whose light you're shining in all those places. And so, Steve, welcome to the show.
That might be the best introduction I've had. Thank you so much. I hope I live up to how you've introduced me today. But I'm very thankful.
No, you already have. Because you just
thankful.
But it's that heart of gratitude and thankfulness that just even before we hopped on, speaking to you, if you know those people, you're like, how have we not known each other our entire lives? And when you talk with them, you're like, I feel like we have known each other our entire lives. You are that person, and that's because of your spirit. And so so excited to dive into so many things. I was again stalking you, and so I have so many questions, but we've got to kick this off the way I kick off every single convo, which is, what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite
Which is going to be hard for you because your whole Instagram feed is amazing quotes.
My favorite quote, it's not actually one of mine. I attribute it to my brother-in-law. There was a time in my life, just to really segue off what you were just saying, I do a lot and I can do a lot. And from an early age, I saw that I could do a lot of different things very well, that it became a bit overwhelming. And one day he said to me, Steve, you can be anything you want to be, just not everything. And it gave me such peace because I felt a pressure to be great in everything that I do. And
oh my gosh,
it's not possible to delegate your time, across everything. Something's going to fall short. And so, yeah, you can be anything you want to be, just not everything. And so it's interesting you say this to me. My goal has been to do less over time, and dial into where my actual calling is, and kind of having the discernment to know the difference between things that I'm very good at and what I'm actually called to do.
Okay, we're going there because I was literally, Steve, this is so God, and this happens to me so much on this podcast, but last night I was talking to someone about how I feel like right now it's like I'm being pulled in so many different directions.
Mm,
And like I need to start discerning, what do I really want to be great at versus what is it okay for me to just be good at? Because
mhm.
my nature is I want to do everything great,
Yeah.
but I can't. But my question for you is, we live in a day and age where you and I are similar in that we both, like, I'm a writer too. I run this
Mm.
podcast too. I don't have children, so I wouldn't even pretend to go there. Like that's another whole thing right there.
It's a
But
full-time job. Mm.
like it is a tough job. But what do you do when you feel called to being a dad, being a writer, being a podcast host, being all these things? But knowing that like they are in different avenues and you will feel spread thin at times. Like what's the difference between the discernment of doing things you just want to do because you're good at them or you like them versus no, I'm called to this.
Mm. You said it. You said the key word, being all of these things rather than doing those things. It's I try to have a flow in my life where who I am as a father is also who I am as someone who would meet me, at an event,
Mm,
or how I speak in my writing. It's the same that I would be, how I would be on set with a film. I try to be very stable in who I am and my essence. Um, I try to keep it consistent in all areas of my life, so I don't have to do much. I
yeah,
show up as me,
yeah,
and it took a while to get to that, because especially when you're younger. When I first started doing this, um, you try and look at other people and you do what they do. You can't be who they are, but you do what they
yeah,
do, and you can get lost in the motion and the actions and the being busy, the proving that you're doing it, but you're not actually being who you are. And so
wow,
it took a very long time, I would say, up until the start of Crown, where it was all about being true to my authentic self. And then it felt less of a burden, the podcast, because I'm just being the same wherever
yeah,
I go.
yeah,
And so it makes it much more seamless when you don't have to turn on, you don't have to switch on the character for the podcast, or now I need to switch into author mode. No, it's the same person, it's the same being. And if you want to compare that to
yeah,
Christ is a carpenter, essentially a fisherman, a prophet,
yeah,
a servant, and he did all of those things the same. He did all of those things, um, not seeking praise, not trying to be the most famous. He didn't want to create a big scene. Now, when you think about what he was capable of, he did it really low key.
wow,
He did it differently to everyone else, and it wasn't frequent according to the way the word describes it. So it was very random and it was very spontaneous, and it was as he was being led, rather than it being a skill based thing where he feels obligated to do it. It was his
wow,
calling. And so I would say, in your example where you've asked me, is what's the thing you've been called to do? Give that the most attention, and then let that flow into the other areas, and
wow,
so the podcast was only born because the book existed. And so what are the topics we're going to speak about in the podcast? The book, and I kind of just let everything kind of olive oil flow into everything else.
that
It doesn't mean it's
is
easy. It doesn't mean it's
no,
easy.
it's
But
not easy. It's
that's the
not
way.
easy. That is so, but it's lighter. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. It doesn't mean we're not gonna have a yoke to carry. It
Mm,
just means it's lighter.
mm,
And I think what's so beautiful about what you said, I've never thought about this before, but I can think back onto a time in my life where I was just so exhausted all the time.
mm,
And it was because I felt like every It was like this season where I was like, I think I'm an introvert now because I just want to be at home. Like every time I'm with people, I feel like I have to be on and it's like a performance. And
Mm,
and looking back, it was because I put so much weight on what others thought about me. I felt
mm,
like I had to show up, and my fulfillment of that interaction, whether it was work related or friend related or family related, was contingent on how happy that person was with me,
mm,
not like just an extension of the overflow of my
mm.
predetermined and preset values. And you said something that I literally never thought of before, but a lot of Jesus's healings and interactions were spontaneous.
Yeah,
That if it was like Annie's old thinking would have been exhausting to me because I would have been like, I'm not on for this. I'm not
yeah.
ready for this. Like I
Mm,
have to get ready. But if you so I'm curious, like taking us back, you talk a lot about like living in the gray areas of your life,
mhm,
and you talk about seasons of your life, and even as we do different things we feel called to, there's also different seasons of life that we experience that impact those qualities we kind of govern as our true selves as we're
mm.
doing all these things we're called to. And I'm curious, like there's different seasons, there's gray areas. Take us back to like the most important, like what is a gray area of your life, and what are some of the gray areas you've walked through that kind of led you to this
Mm.
recognition of who you are that you carry out into all the things that you do?
I think it happened in two parts. I have been through a lot of different things in my life. I would say a key point was I used to work in the corporate world. I was worked in accounts, and that was my job, and I made good money. Um, but I never felt fulfilled.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I've never really been a consumer type person. I like what I like, but money wasn't really the goal, and it never really has been the goal. Um, and so I was working in that job, and I remember feeling very unwell one day, and just like flu-like symptoms. And I went to work, and again, this I write about this. This is a habit, working through sickness, working through
yeah.
pain, because I used to play sport, and that was the mindset. Never say die, no days off, and
I
I
played
kept.
sports too. We have too much in common, Steve.
Bless you. Um, and yeah, so I took that same mentality into everything that I did, whether it was in the office or into my work now, that I just keep going. But that day, I collapsed at work, and they found me in the bathroom in the office block, and I woke up in the hospital. That's all I remembered, and they didn't know what was wrong. They thought maybe I just fainted, and so I went home, went back to work, and a week later it happened again. And so now I'm starting a process of investigations and trying to figure out what's going on with me. During this time, I can't work that job anymore because I'm too unpredictable, too spontaneous. Um,
Mm,
but it was just really painful, just having these falls, not remembering anything. And then afterwards, my muscles and my body just aching for days, and I have to recover. My mind's like foggy. But it was later determined that I have epilepsy, and I was having
mm,
seizures. Um, but it was not controlled because the investigation was taking so long that I wasn't on any medications or anything. And so I was bedbound. I was scared to leave my bed. And that day, something within me, I'm going to show my age now. So social media at that time was FacePic, MySpace, and Facebook had just started.
yep.
Okay. And I remember going online every single day and writing, I wish you better days. And I didn't know why I
Mm,
was writing it. I just posted it at the same time every day for a year. And at first, no one was seeing it. Friends, a few musicians I worked with. But after a while, people got used to seeing it and were expecting to see it. And they said it just makes them feel good. And it started to evolve from that I wish you better days into quotes, into blogs, and then eventually books. Now, at that point in my life, people were coming to me for advice, sending me emails. I was getting, at one point, I think at the maximum, it's like 300 emails a day. people asking me
Wow.
for life advice online. Meanwhile,
Wow.
I'm in my bed, afraid to go to the bathroom because I might fall.
Wow.
And so I learned really early on that we can call that the highlights. Okay. That's the highlights. People see the highlights. But there was a very real shadow side happening in my life, that no one
Mm,
was aware of. But I was doing well just showing the highlights. And so I got deeper into the self help world and motivational speaking. I eventually started touring, selling books and doing meet and greets, book signings, but I was only showing highlights. I'll tell parts of my story, but they were really only interested in the feel good stuff, highlights. Kept doing that, but there's no end to that. And eventually I burned out. And probably my lowest point, that's when I stepped away and came offline, 2015, 2016. And I realized that I need to confront my shadows,
mm,
but life didn't stop lifing, things were still happening. But it was
mm,
just compounded trauma over and over again. And my son was born and he had a stroke.
mm.
Um, and that, resulted in him having brain damage and also epilepsy. And previously, I basically retired as an author. Yeah, my lowest point, my final book was called The Suicide Note.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, when I saw that little boy, I just thought, I can't end on that. I need to write
mm,
something for him. And the whole idea was that he would know that he is royalty despite his differences. So that's where Crown
wow.
was born. Everyone owes my son thanks for that. And that
Yeah.
evolved and evolved and evolved. But Crown was different because where the other side was more pump you up, motivation, think positive, manifest, God is good all the time, God is good. The other side really spoke to the human experience, and actually it's painful and it's sad, and there are good times and there are bad times. And so just being able to connect with the emotion, it felt like years of bottled up emotion that I can now pour into my work, but in a way that others can relate to it and not kind of hide between the highlights. And so the gray area is, I guess, my attempt of saying to people that it's not good or bad, it's both. And
Both.
it's about finding peace and contentment and harmony in that. And once you
Wow.
do, you will live more fulfilled. You will feel more purposeful. Because if you stop when you're in a downtime and you go when you're in a good time, you're always going to be starting and stopping, starting and
Yeah.
stopping. But if you can
Mm,
find comfort and a sense of belonging in that gray, it's only then where you'll be able to see with clear eyes where the beauty in that is. But for as long
mm.
as you see it as the enemy, either side, you'll never
Wow.
see anything as beautiful, and so the gray is always happening. I'm sure right now you've got a lot of exciting things happening in your life, but I'm sure there are also things that are not so great. And
Yeah.
how beautiful would it be to be content in that,
And both.
regardless, and so that's the gray for me. Through life experiences,
Mm,
I've experienced a lot of joy, and I've experienced a lot of sadness and deep pain. um, but each of those things, um, they're beautiful because no seizures, no books.
wow.
And that's the beauty in the
Wow.
gray area.
And it's so funny. Like what's coming to mind right now is how like Paul, when Paul talks about like, the thorn in his side and in his flesh, and like, but God isn't taking it away. It's like
Mm,
it's both. And one of my pastors once said, like, the thorn is his mentor. Like the thorn is this thing that reminds him you need the grace of God. Like if life
mm,
was perfect, you wouldn't be able to look to God and rely on him and lean on him. It also, I think about Peter walking on water. Like there's no indication that when he was walking on the water and when he started to sink, the wind got any bigger. It was his
mm,
focus that shifted from Jesus to the wind. And like,
mm,
it's always going to be both. Like, we have the light and the promise of Jesus, but we also have the wind of the world, which is sickness and illness and sin and pain and injury and other people's opinions and
mm.
rejection and expectations for ourselves and other people. And I think like it's the dance of both. And you said something that I thought was so beautiful, which is like you started fighting your shadows. I'm curious, how does one do that? What does that look like to fight the
So
shadows,
it's
knowing
just,
that it's always going to be both?
yeah, so it's, if you can go, I just want to touch on what you said about Paul, because that's
Yeah.
interesting. You said Paul. When I think of Paul, I think Saul.
Oh,
And the
tell
reason
me
why
more.
is because if you don't have the Saul part, the testimony is not a testimony, So,
Yeah.
so Paul became that, but that's not the whole of his story. Him being locked up in prison, writing letters isn't the whole of his story. When you consider the Saul part, it makes it that much more remarkable what we're reading. That this man persecuted Christians, and now he's one of the leading voices in the word. And
Mm.
so that's highlights and shadows, and the great area is the road to Damascus. Him losing his sight, people would think that that's the worst possible scenario in life. That's painful, that's horrible for a man to lose his sight. But as he lost his sight, he was then able to see the truth, see
Mm.
God, see his calling on life. And so that great area is where all the magic happened. But if it,
And the wrestling. I think about Jacob becoming Israel after he wrestled with God. I think about Simon becoming Peter. Like
mm,
Simon was, and you think about like when Jesus died, and basically the disciples were like, "Well, wait, what?"
mm,
Peter went back fishing, right? But then like Jesus came back and said, "Peter, do you love me?" And it's like
mm,
the gray area is where you wrestle. The gray area is where there is sometimes a blindness, but that leads to the ultimate vision.
mm.
Like you can see but not have vision.
So
And
that's
so
that you've
and so
you've
I love
literally,
okay, so keep talking. This is so
yeah.
good.
So you literally just described, so in Crown, I believe it's Crown one, I think I talk about the gray area, and I describe it as being faith. The gray is faith, you know. And in this latest piece, I describe it as fog. It's beautiful fog. When you see it over the mountains, it's beautiful. But when
Ooh.
you walk into it, you don't see it because you're in it. And that's very much like a lot of things in life: deception, sleep. You don't know you're in it until you come out of it. And so to be able to still keep walking and not be able to see where you're going, that requires faith. So I think the gray is faith. And so you asked about the wrestling with the shadows. It's, for me, anytime something bad happened, I would try to either fix it or
Wow.
condemn it. And so that sounds like a logical thing to do, but when something bad happens and it's attached to you, it's hard to condemn it without condemning yourself.
Wow.
And so what I started to do was looking at my life situations, and instead of feeling like the victim of, a really tough life, it's like, actually, this could be a moment, just like the seizure moment, just like my son moment, that actually creates something beautiful. Just like Saul, if that doesn't happen, we don't have Galatians, Ephesians, we don't have these
Mhm.
books, you know?
Yeah.
And so
Oh my god.
it's kind of reframing how you view life, and not kind of just putting it black or white,
Yeah.
good or bad, but actually it's all perfect. That was the word you used. It is perfect. It is perfect because um, to say, Steve, if you can go back and not have a seizure, would you choose that? Most people would say yes, of course. But that means that everything that happened after that wouldn't happen. We would not be having this conversation right now. There'd not be these books. I'd probably be an old accountant somewhere, not living my life purpose. And so purpose doesn't always come from a place of
Mm.
everything being laid out for you. Sometimes it is the wilderness, the storm, the great area that pulls it out of you. And it doesn't stop happening because life will continue to have those highlights, shadows, and you've got to find peace and contentment in that. And I think sometimes in faith, that's not preached enough, in that we kind of
Yeah.
teach people, once you're saved, you're baptized,
Yep.
it's going to turn your life around. People kind of
Yep.
expect that things will just be beautiful in heaven. Like, actually, it's quite the opposite. It may get
Yeah.
rougher for you because now you're a threat to another
Yep.
kingdom and you will be afflicted. And so for me now, where I'm at is trying to stay present and not allow the things that happen in life to kind of cloud the overall picture of actually this is necessary, and that's the daily walk that I think it's not spoken about enough, that actually you have to get used to pain, just as you have
Mm.
to learn to accept happiness and love
Wow.
and kindness and forgiveness. There
Wow.
are beautiful things that we don't accept also. And so it's just a
That
balance.
is so beautiful. Do you know who
It's a
Brene
balance.
Brown is?
Yes.
She talks about emotional numbing and
Mm,
how when you numb out the negative emotions, you inadvertently also numb out the positive. So, like, if I go through something painful and I don't want to feel that fear or that insecurity or that pain, what I'm doing to my emotional senses is also numbing out my ability to feel joy and
mm,
happiness and appreciation, because it's the same heart.
mm,
But you flip that on its head. If you're brave enough to feel the pain you're going through, it also deepens your capacity and threshold to feel joy. And
mm,
I know this to be true because when I go through like oh gosh, what was the last really painful thing I went through? I feel like there's been a couple, but the big thing was when I lost a family member about 2 years ago, and it was incredibly hard. And I remember that, like, all of a sudden, when my mom would text me I love you, or when my dad would text me I love you, things that I'm blessed to say I get received daily, if not,
mm,
right? Like, I have parents that will do that for me. um it would bring me to tears,
mm,
not because I wasn't used to experiencing it, but all of a sudden my capacity to experience the appreciation for it was so much deeper because my heart had been cut so
yeah.
much deeper by the pain of losing a woman who was like another mother to me.
Mm,
And so you look at it like that, and I'm curious, Romans 8:28, like, God uses all things for the good of those
good.
who
Yeah.
glorify and love him. And, like, you think about, I'm curious your thoughts on that. Like, how much of it is our responsibility to find a positive meaning, so to speak, in the things that we're going through,
Mm,
versus trusting God will use it for good, um, in sitting through that pain? And the reason I ask this question is because I think sometimes my version of numbing out is like toxic positivity. I
mm,
always try to find the opportunity,
mm,
and I always try to find what's good about it.
mm,
But sometimes that prevents me from actually feeling the heart and
mm,
feeling the pain itself. So talk to me
mm.
about that dance between knowing God will use it for good, but also allowing yourself to feel the pain of the moment.
Yeah. So I don't get attached to the outcome, and I try not to project what I want it to be. Because I've been through so many things now and got the hindsight to see that if I changed anything, if I changed, what I was feeling in that moment, if I changed, my emotional response to those things, I wouldn't be here now. So the knowing that all things work out for good is something I meditated on, but I never tried to make a negative situation or a painful situation. I never tried to take away the pain of that by clothing it in positivity.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing. Pre Steve Whyte was doing that, the
Yeah.
highlight side. Since Crown, no, I want people to be able to feel. It's okay to feel. And you don't need to turn a negative into a positive. That, think of a battery. It has a positive and it has a negative. Okay. You put it in the slot, you get electricity, but it needs both. Okay. If you
Mm,
take one side out, let's say the negative side, now you don't have any power. Okay. And
wow.
so a lot of our growth comes, a lot of our growth comes from both. You have to go through trials and tribulations. You have to go through moments of joy, moments of, sadness, moments of excitement, because that's the human experience. There were times where Christ was happy. There was times where he was angry. There was times where he, was excited. There was times where he felt powerless, and that's all a part of it. And so, yeah, I was that toxic positivity guy. And I just, like I said before, like in the fog, when you're in it, you don't realize it, because my peers were also those people. My audience were those people. They wanted that content. But actually, it was when I started doing coaching, I realized that the people that I'm speaking to don't need coaching. They need therapy. They need
What's the difference?
Coaching is more guidance, kind of teaching how to cope with things, teaching how to get to somewhere, motivating someone. Whereas therapy it's not the therapist's responsibility to fix anything or to tell you what to do. It's just creating an environment where you can discover those things for yourself, right? Coaching isn't a transferal of knowledge or information. However, it's guidance. Mentoring is a transferal. This is from my experience. I can help you. I could be your mentor. So, but the coaching is, you don't have the qualifications, nor do you have the know-how to speak to someone's past trauma. You can't do it. You're not qualified to. You have to be a doctor. You have to know how to do that. And so I was going down this toxic positivity route, thinking that you can think your way through things and just be happy and the people that were actually coming to me, my audience, were people who had deep-rooted pain for years and years, and they needed help getting through it. And so that was really the shift for me, realizing that I was only speaking to half of my audience, and Crown really opened up the other half. And so I'm not saying there's not a place for that side, the positive and being opportunity and zest for life. There is a place for that. But if you don't address the things that are beneath the surface first, you will always hit a glass ceiling, because nothing will ever feel good enough.
Yeah.
So,
That's what you said about the battery was so powerful. I'd never heard it put like that, but it's so true. And okay, this is cool. So we were talking about like shadows and fighting your shadows. I told you I'm in the middle of writing my next book, and one of the other day I was researching about shadows for some reason. Like, I don't know, it's just on my heart. So it's funny we're talking about this now, and this is crazy, but you might have already known this. I didn't know this, but I Googled like where does the light have to be placed in order for a shadow to exist? And there were two things that hit me like right in the square peg of the nose, which was one, the shadows can only exist when both an object blocking the light and the light are present.
right.
That hit me because I was like, so often we go through a shadow season and we feel like God's left us, but the evidence that God is still with us is the shadow. Because in order for a shadow to even exist, light has to be present. And I was like, whoa. The second thing that hit me was the placement of the light. The light has to be either above or beside the object that's blocking it to cast a shadow. And the length of the shadow is a lot longer when the object is adjacent to the object blocking it, versus if the light is at the highest point of the sky, like if the sun is at the highest point of the sky, the shadows are a lot shorter. And what I felt like the Spirit was telling me was like, Annie, when you keep God at the very highest point of your attention in your life, it's not that the shadows go away, but they're a lot shorter than when you put him adjacent to fear and insecurity and doubt and accomplishments and working for worth and followers and likes and anything else, money, anything else that would distract us. When you put him adjacent to all those things, the shadows are longer. It's not that the shadow isn't there ever when you put God up top, but it's just shorter. And what you were saying about like, it's both. It is both. It's light and there's always a shadow, but the shadow helps us point back towards the light that is casting that shadow, which is
mm,
what its essence is. And so I just think that's so cool. And I would love to know too, like your relationship with Jesus. I mean,
mm,
how has that evolved in parallel with the creation in your work and
mm.
in all of this? Like, have you always had this personal relationship with Jesus, or how has that kind of evolved throughout the years?
Yeah, and so this it's inseparable. My I obviously grew up in a Christian home, and at that point it was just the norm. But there was a point in my life where I wanted to seek for myself, and started reading a lot of books and going to different churches and mosques and all different things. Just wanted to kind of know what feels right for me. And there was one verse actually in the Bible that
Mm,
really stood out to me, and there's two things I don't think they're focused on enough, even today. One of them was, um, do not just be hearers of the word, be doers of the word. Right? I took that
mm,
personally. You know, I took that. I took that really personally. Like, actually, I'm not supposed to be someone who just talks about it or goes every Sunday and hears a sermon and then doesn't go out and share that. And then, one of the last things Christ said, prior to crucifixion is, go out into the world and spread the gospel, you know. And I just wasn't seeing that from church to church. I was seeing a lot of people coming like a community club, and we all have a great time and we get our fix while we're in the building. But then Monday morning happens and we all just go back into the real world. But how many people are actually sharing what they've learned? And I'm not talking about preaching. I'm talking about, are you living? Are you being a doer of the word? Are you living what you've just like been worshiping? And so for me, I knew my calling was serving people, um, like providing hope, providing counsel, encouragement, advice, and I just never stopped. I've just always believed that's my calling, and the mediums that I use to do them, they will change. Film, writing, you
yeah.
know, they will change, but the essence I was speaking of in the beginning, um, it's quiet. It's the small things, helping someone in the store, or
Yeah.
reaching out to someone, or if you see someone's stories and they're upset, like, I'm the person that will say, "Are you okay? Do you want to
Mhm.
talk?" And it's that's my area. Everyone's got a different one, but so for me, it's the word, like being Christ-like. That's how I process that.
Mm,
It's, and I'm not perfect in every other area, but in this space, oh, service, that's me, and I'm comfortable here, and so that's really it. And because of that, I've been able to, my relationship is mine. It's not necessarily religious. It's not tied to any one ministry. But I've just always wanted to make sure my contribution reflects what I say
yeah.
is my truth. And I actually wrote about it in the introduction of my memoir. And I said, I've always thought about, if there was a book in the Bible called Steve, what would it say?
Wow.
And
Wow.
we can call that the newer testament, the newest testament, because we all have stories.
Yeah.
We're all just like, the apostles. They were in a time, and there was someone was writing these things and on scripts and scrolls, um, and they was passed down, and that's what we read today. But what's the story of you today? What does the
Mhm.
book of Annie say? What does the book of Michael say, or the book of Steve say? And so I wanted my story. I became obsessed with that. And it was very much like, I want to make sure my story has a good message,
Yeah.
because
Well, and
all of the books are different, and they all have a different message.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so
It's so beautiful.
that's what's kept me going, and that's where my faith is like,
Wow.
okay, how do I, when it's all said and done, what
Wow.
story does my life tell?
Wow.
And that's
And
it.
I think you mentioned a little bit ago, but like comparing yourself to other people, like if you're looking at other people, you're going to miss the miracle that's you and the way God wanted you to write like your story. And
mm,
I think what's so cool is even you look at all the gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all wrote so differently. Like, some were more like John was just such a lovey-dovey. I'm definitely a John kind of writer. I'm just like gushiness, but like Matthew was very analytical. And
mm,
like Luke was a doctor. He was very and so like, but they were all pointing back to the same God
yeah, just
and the
in a
same
different
love of
way.
Christ.
Yeah.
And if you spend so much time fixating on how someone else is doing it versus how God gave you the heart to do it, even like I think about Paul writes about in Galatians, like, if I'm to spend my time looking at how like Peter was responsible for talking to the Jews, but Paul was responsible for talking to the Gentiles. What if Paul was like, dang, why didn't God call me to talk to the Jews? And got out in a tiff about that and didn't look at what God called him to do.
Mm,
Like, I just think that, you were going back to the mission of this podcast, trusted with a space to shine God's light. How are
mm,
you doing that? And I love what you said about relationship versus religion. I was actually talking to a guy last night who used those exact words. He
mm,
was like, I think there's so many things the church has kind of gone back to that aren't great. Like it is more, some are more religion based versus
mm.
relationship based, but it's like we're called to a person, a relationship with our creator. And you dropped something there which was powerful, which is your memoir coming up.
Yes.
So
Yes.
okay, I know we only have a few minutes left. We've got to talk about that. So
Yes.
Steve, go at it. Why now? The essence behind it, what we were talking about before we hopped on, like I just
Mm.
want everybody to hear.
So essentially, after releasing the Crown series, for those that don't know, Crown is a story, although it was written for my son, it's very relatable for everyone. But it's a fictional story about a character, which is you. As you read it, you're reading about yourself. And you go on a journey through your palace and you meet different parts of yourself in the form of different characters and different items. And the mission is that you see yourself, but you can't because you shame, whatever it may be, any traumas. So you're royalty, but you can't see it. Your palace is beautiful and you can't see it. And the character goes on a long journey where they eventually leave the palace, and what they've learned in the palace doesn't work in the real world, and they end up in this war. Very similar to like the spiritual warfare, but they have to go through that to see parts of themselves. And it's very mythical, very think Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, mixed with the Bible, mixed with poetry.
I mean, if that's not an ideal combo, I don't
It's
know what.
it's very mythical and it's very entertaining. And all I've done is, in a sense, like the word, romanticized some of the harder to talk about topics and put it into fiction so that you can start to look at those areas of your life gently and not feel triggered and not feel ashamed.
Mm,
Um, and so I just wanted to present a different kind of portrait of what the grey looks like, and that it's not a
mm,
bad thing, it's not ugly, it's not horrible, it's beautiful. And and so after I finished, the last crown was Crown Infinity. It just seemed like the next natural step. My memoir is called Monochrome, and it's written in the same style as Crown, so it's also like fiction, but this time I'm the main character. And
wow.
so the message of it is really there is beauty in the grey area, and I use my life experiences and different encounters that I have to show that, and I do it through my favorite songs, my favorite films, and just my favorite, just all of the things that I like, plants, loads of things, and to tell a story and that has that underlying message of there is beauty in the grey area, and it's okay to feel, and it's okay to heal, and um, essentially that without ruining it, that he stood in the shadows the whole time,
Mm, mm,
and that,
wow.
you know, that might be that one line may be enough to speak to someone after reading the whole story, as opposed to me preaching, saying this is the way, the only way. Maybe my life story is enough, just like Saul's. Maybe if someone could see who he was before and see the transformation, that's so much more powerful than Paul just showing up and saying, hey guys, you should believe in Christ. No, check my letters, guys. Look at how I used to persecute Christians. Now that's very different. It meets them where they are, and it brings them in gently. And I think that's really what monochrome does. It makes everything make sense. And this is it. I'm really pleased with it. I know it's shocking to a lot of people because it's been a secret, but I really needed to lean into God. I needed to lean into myself. And I felt like I owed it to myself to make this one be for me.
Wow.
And by stepping away and just working on this, I was able to do it. I've got an amazing foreword by Danielle Lewis, amazing author, the acknowledgement by Dr. Tamant Bryan. It's just, I'm so thankful, and I don't usually compare my work, but this is my best work and my most important piece of work. So,
Well, this is your 17th book. So we have to say that because when you say this is my best work, there's a lot of work
this
that
is a
you're
lot.
comparing it to. It's
Yeah.
not like this is your second book. This is your 17th book. I'm curious, you said this has been 5 years in the making,
Yeah.
right? Why now?
I've kind of had this thing where, again, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, when you can do a lot, there's a temptation to keep doing a lot. And just because you can, keep doing more and more. But I kind of feel I'm at a space now, and this is what I love about your platform, and this is why I've chosen you as the place I wanted to talk about monochrome, is you speak to a lot of young people. And that was once me, And so when I first started this, I was very young. I was in my early 20s, and I was that like, oh my gosh, how does he speak this way? And how can he have a book and he's that age? And so the young people could really relate to me because I was very much like them. And so like to be here now, having accomplished everything that I have, it just felt like, okay, a lot of people ask me, how do you write this way? And I just want people to see that what they see as the end result is just a part of the story that they don't know about. So how did I get to this point? Why do I speak the way that I speak? Why do I write the way that I write? It's because of the gray area. It's because of those highs, those lows. And that's really what I wanted people to get from this one. And it just felt like the time's right. I finished with Crown, got the podcast up and running, and to shoot the film and document the whole journey and be able to kind of present that. That was needed, and it felt like the right time. And I would say the most important reason why now is this has been my therapy. Doing the work that I do is draining. I'm always pouring out into others. I'm always taking on other people's issues, and there's very rarely space for my own. And so to have this time where I came offline and I could just really dive into the story of me and feel it all. Painful, but also funny, also inspiring. It felt very organic, and it feels like this is the correct time. If not now, then when?
That's so good. And I think one to affirm you there because it takes boldness and courage to sink into yourself and into a season. And I think busyness is it's a vice a lot of us use to numb out from actually feeling what needs to be felt. And we just are getting busy and busy and busy and busy, and it's celebrated in this world, especially this younger generation. I remember being their age in college, and like it was a flex when you were like, yeah, I got 2 hours of sleep because I was so busy, or like bragging about whose schedule is busier. And I think what you did by example is you said, no, I'm going to choose to sink. And from that, the fruit of that is this beautiful story of your life that is going to be able to serve so many people. And there's a quote I love, which is, "You are most qualified to serve the person you once were." And so you mentioned like writing this book for you. And I think that's just such a beautiful thing. It's a hard thing. It's not easy, but I thank you on behalf of this generation, on behalf of people that are going to be listening, because
Mm,
what you're doing is needed. Like, we need more brave souls like yourself who are willing to do the hard work,
mm.
create a light that you can hand back to other people. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Can I read something real
I
quickly?
actually would, I saw you opening it. I was going to ask you
You
to,
know,
please.
um, so I've got some poems in here um, that kind of tell the story, and one of them is called "He Stood in the Shadows," and so I wanted to read that for anyone that's listening or watching that uh, maybe feels like they've got their purpose, but something's not working, and every time they start, something happens, or I want this to be encouragement to you that it doesn't matter how long it takes, or how dark it may seem, um, that there is hope and there's grace. And so it reads, throughout all of the pain and the darkness of day, a peace resonated in a strange kind of way. Even my darkness could only go so far. The light in my life came and gave me a star. I found hope in adversity and was never alone. Love encamped me around my soul, and now I have grown. Peace protected my heart from a life filled with pain, saved me from suicide again and again, helped me to get up each time that I fell, seizures, gave me a second chance to get out of hell. Even when I felt alone, it was always right there. The love restored my hope, and nothing compares. It disabled my strongholds and caused my burdens to break, and took what was destroyed and wiped away all of my mistakes. It taught me the lessons that I needed to know, and healed my heart while the winds continued to blow, keeping my feet on higher ground when I was at my lowest point, giving me room to live my life but not to be destroyed, to hope, faith, and freedom to turn my life around. I found my crown along my path when it was upside down. The love inside gave me the strength to feel life beyond the pain. I strive to share it every day to feel that love again. I learned to see in my darkest hour and feed my faith so it grows. Now I can see he never left. He stood in the shadows. And that's just really to encourage anyone. Just, sometimes it can feel like he's left you or he's forgotten you. But he's there. And just as Annie has said, there is no shadow without the light. And um, even when it feels dark and you can't see your way out, he's given each of us the capacity to be the light in our tunnel.
Wow.
And so shine your light. Do not hide it under your bed. Do not need to brag about it. A light doesn't need to say, hey, everyone, look, I'm shining. Just let it shine, and your corner of the world will be illuminated. Your lantern that you place is part of a much bigger picture. So whatever your name is, whoever you are, just know that you are writing the book of you every single day, and in this newer testament. And there's
And
beauty in
this
the gray
is
area.
just, Steve, I actually don't think there's ever been a more beautiful cap out to a Made to Shine
Bless you.
episode. That is so with what this podcast is about, Made to Shine. Like, I genuinely thank you
Thank
for
you for
reading that
having
and
me.
sharing your heart. And like, this is just, I mean, I'm gonna have to sit with this for a little bit. This was just so beautiful. The last thing is, where can people find you in this book? Because I know they're
um,
gonna want to right after this.
yeah, so all of my books are only available from my website, iamstevewhyte.com.
Okay.
If you're on my social media, you'll find it. If you
Yeah.
Google me, you'll find it. And yeah, it's there. I appreciate every single person who spends the time to read. I've been very passionate about keeping physical books alive. I have got some digital versions available, But I always will tell people, especially with Crown, because you can write in it, when you hold it and you read it and you feel it, it hits different. And so
Yeah, it
I
does.
don't take for granted people who take the time out to read my writing. And yeah, I'm very thankful for this space and you sharing it with me. We finally got it done. I'll have to have you on my podcast next,
I will happily join.
because we had some
We're gonna
great
have to make it 2
conversation.
hours. And
Yeah.
talk forever.
But thank you for giving me this space to speak about this.
Well, thank you for taking it and doing the work that allowed you to take it. That took, it was the unseen work
Mm,
that led to this moment. And that's what I want to recognize, because writers, creators, being one and recognizing the heart in another, like, it's the unseen work that
mm,
no one claps for, that isn't sexy, that isn't pretty,
mm,
that allows you to have moments like this where you can share your heart and to use that for the good of others is so beautiful. You are a light and you are shining, and you don't have to say, look at me, I'm Steve, because you're so bright. People
Bless
will
you.
look at you because they are craving for the warmth that you give.
Mm,
And so thank you for all you do, Steve. It has been an honor to have you on the show. I
thank
can't wait
you.
to have you back.
Yeah,
And
I'll be back.
for this new friendship, and congratulations on your memoir.
Thank you very much. Keep going. Keep going.
And I hope that this blessed you and encouraged you, reminded you that God gave you a unique light, and it is your job to shine it in this world because we need you to. That being said, if you were blessed by this message and you can think of anybody else that also needs this type of encouragement, do me a favor, hit like, hit subscribe, leave me a comment. It helps me out a lot and helps this message that I do believe God gave my heart to share with the world gets out. I hope you have such an amazing rest of your day.